Hello students. Lastly, we have gone through the practical session of MySQL database connectivity using the concept of object-oriented programming language, in which first we have implemented the file called dao.php, which establishes the necessary connections between the front end and the back end by writing the logical lines. Now it's time to go for another file, that is controller.php. Into the controller.php file, first write down a function called include underscore ones, and into the single inverted comma mention the file name called dao.php, which calls this particular file and makes a necessary connection between the front end and back end by checking the database username and password. Then into the next line of code, first create a one class called CRUD controller. Into the opening and closing bracket of this particular class, define a one function which is called as read data. The purpose of writing this particular function is to display the content from database onto the browser. So now into the bracket of this particular function, first write down the try and catch. Into the try, write down the variable name called $DAO equals to new DAO. It creates an object, then it checks for the necessary connection and it opens the connection. Into the SQL, write down a query like this: select ID, title, description, URL, category from TB underscore link. So this TB underscore link is a database table which displays all the information, that is ID, title, description and URL in descending order, because in this my query I have used a function called order by. Then after this line, write down $resource equals to $connection reference to the query, and into the bracket pass the query variable. This line of code will execute this particular query and it will fetch all the records from TB underscore link database table and it will display onto the screen. So write down $result equals to $resource, fetch all PHP data object, in short PDO, scope resolution operator, fetch underscore associative. So this query will fetch all the records from TB underscore database table and stores the result into the variable called result. Then after complete this particular connection by writing close connection. Into the catch, if anything goes wrong in this particular query, it will execute an error message and displays onto the screen with the help of this echo statement, which displays the message that there is some problem in connection and that connection will get closed, and it returns true or false onto the screen. Now students, in our database table, it might possible that one or more record, that is called as multiple records, are available. So we need to implement such an activity that it might returns a single column or it will returns the multiple columns. So for that, here I have implemented a two separate function which reads the single ID and it will display the record, and it will read the ID and it will display the multiple records if any into the database table. So for reading a single ID and fetching that particular record onto the screen, yes, it is called as search also. This particular function is designed. The name of function is read single, and as a parametric value I am passing the ID of that particular post. Here ID is the ID of your record which is stored inside the database table. Say for example, In last lecture we have created a one post, that is content management system using WordPress, and the ID of that particular post is 12. So that ID is passed over here and it will get searched by this query and returns onto the screen. So the same programming sequence I have mentioned over here. Over here I have written a try and catch function over here. Then $DAO equals to new DAO creates a new object. Then this particular objects get open the connection and it fires the query. Select ID, title, description, URL, category from TB underscore link. But the difference is over here. It displays all this information of a particular ID which is passed by the user. Then this query get executed by writing dollar reference to query into the bracket $SQL. Whatever the data is selected by this particular query has been stored inside the variable called $result, and this fetch underscore associative function retrieves all this record from the database and it throws over the browser. Now mainly we are learning this particular module for the three purpose, that is to display the records, to edit the records, to delete the records, and to add the new records. So these three separate functions we have developed over here. The first function is for adding the new records into the database. Second function is to delete the records from the database. And third one is to edit the record which is already stored inside the database. Keep one thing in mind: if the data is present into the database table, then it can be edited or deleted. If your database table is empty, then we need to perform the first operation, that is called as an operation of add. So right now we are discussing about the function called add. For that I have created this add function with the public visibility because it can be accessed anywhere into the program. Then as a parametric value I am passing $from array into the bracket of this particular function. First I am accepting the value through $post title into the variable called $title. Same like that for description, for URL, and for category. Now where this data comes from, whenever you pressed this button and whatever the information that you enters in all these four text box, and after pressing the submit button, it stores all this information in this local variable. Now once the local variable holds the information, it's time to insert the records into the TB underscore link table. So for that, first we need to write insert into TB underscore link. First is title, second is description, third is URL, fourth is category, and then we have to write values into the bracket, the variable called $title, $description, $URL, and $category. After writing this query, it's time to execute this particular query by the statement $connection reference to the query into the bracket SQL, which stores a relevant value into the database table, and at last the connection get closed. Now for the second function called edit, almost everything is similar, just we need to change the query from insert into to update, which changes the record which is already stored inside the database table. But remember one thing, all the data no need to be changed, only the particular data to be changed. That's why we are passing ID as a reference into the where clause. Means whatever the ID that you select and press the edit button, that particular data is going to be changed. So for that, here we have written where clause. Now the third function, which is delete, is more simpler than add and edit, because into the delete simply we have to write delete and the table name, then we have to pass the ID. What happens, suppose we have not written a where clause into the edit and delete. If we have not written a where clause, then automatically all the data gets edited or all the data gets deleted. So keep this thing in your mind.